We'd like to call this evening's meeting of the Peoria City Council to order. Welcome H. Wayne Wilson and his listening audience at WCBU as well as Cable Channel 22. Madam Clerk, the council mics are open for roll call.
Mayor Artis.
Here.
Councilmember Akeson. Councilmember Sear. Councilmember Grayeb. Councilmember Jensen. Councilmember Montalongo. Councilmember Moore. Councilmember Euler.
Here.
Councilmember Riggenbach.
Here.
Councilmember Ruckriegel. Councilmember Turner. You have a quorum present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'd like to invite everyone to join us and stand for a moment of silent prayer or silent reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Looks like we have one proclamation tonight. Would like to ask the folks from the Family House to meet me here in front for the National Hospitality House Week.
Is this good? Is this all right?
Whereas hundreds of families travel into our community each year seeking medical care for loved ones, and whereas these families need the comfort and support of others who understand the emotional and financial stress of going through a medical crisis, and whereas being far from home during a medical crisis compounds the stress for both the patient and their loved ones. And whereas Family House provides affordable, home-like accommodations for families of patients receiving health care services in the Peoria area, and whereas partnerships with hospitals and other health care organizations ensure that families know about services provided by the Family House, and whereas the Family House joins the Healthcare Hospitality Network and houses across North America to recognize the importance of compassionate lodging for families in need. Now, therefore, I, Jim Artis, Mayor of the City of Peoria, do hereby proclaim July 23rd through 29th as National Hospitality Week in Peoria, and I encourage all citizens of Peoria to join in this important observance. The Peoria City Council extends our sincere appreciation and gratitude for the dedication, commitment, and leadership provided by the Board of Directors, staff, volunteers, and supporters of the Family House. I'd like to introduce Laura Blackaby, who's the Executive Director, for some more information.
Good evening. I'm joined tonight by Brian O'Neill, who's Vice President of the Family House Board of Directors. Mayor Artis and members of the Peoria City Council and those in attendance, thank you so very much for your support of Family House. We are a 20-room healthcare hospitality house located here in Peoria. We've been serving families since 1985 and serve hundreds of families each year who come to Peoria to receive healthcare services. Many of those families come to us because they are in the midst of a healthcare crisis. Last year, we served families from 28 different states and 4 countries. So we are very grateful for the support from our community to be able to allow us to provide affordable home-like accommodations for those who come to Peoria to seek medical services. Thank you so much for your time this evening, and have a nice night.
Councilmember Grayeb.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the minutes of the regular City Council meeting held on July 11, 2017 as printed.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilmember Turner. Are there any corrections or changes to the minutes? Seeing no lights, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Our first item is a public hearing, 17-215. It regards the proposed annexation of property at the location of 6019 West Eagle Creek Drive.
Councilmember Sear.
Move to open the hearing.
Move to open the public hearing, seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. Seeing no objections, please cast your ballots to open the public hearing. That motion passes unanimously. The public hearing is now open for anyone who would like to address the council regarding the proposed annexation of a property having the address of 6019 West Eagle Creek Drive in Peoria. First call. Second call for anyone who would like to address the council in this public hearing regarding the annexation of 6019 West Eagle Creek Drive. Third and last call. Anyone who would like to address the council in this public hearing regarding the proposed annexation of property with the address of 6019 West Eagle Creek Drive, Peoria, Illinois. Seeing none, Councilman Sear.
Mr. Mayor, move to close.
We have a motion to close the public hearing, seconded by Councilmember Jensen. Seeing no objections, please cast your ballot to close the public hearing. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
17-216 is a public hearing regarding the proposed annexation of a property at the location of 6022 West Eagle Creek Drive.
Thank you. Councilmember Sear.
Move to open public hearing.
We have a motion to open this public hearing, seconded by Councilmember Jensen. Seeing no objections, please cast your ballots to open this public hearing. That motion passes unanimously. At this time, we'd like to invite everyone who would like to address the council in the public hearing regarding the annexation of a property having the address of 6022 West Eagle Creek Drive. First call. Sir, were you wanting to speak on the public hearing, or you? No. Okay. Okay, thank you. Second call for anyone who would like to address the council in the public hearing regarding 6022 West Eagle Creek Drive. Third and last call for anyone who would like to address the council regarding the public hearing on the proposed annexation of the property at 6022 West Eagle Creek Drive in Peoria. And seeing none, Councilmember Sear.
Mr. Mayor, move to close.
Close the public hearing, seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. Seeing no discussion, please cast your ballots to close the public hearing. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Item 17-217 is a communication from the City Manager and the Community Development Director with a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff for the following. A is to approve a resolution approving an annexation agreement for 6019 West Eagle Creek Drive. B is to adopt an ordinance annexing territory located at 6019 West Eagle Creek Drive. And C is to adopt an ordinance rezoning the property from a Class R3 Peoria County single-family residential to an R2 single-family residential located at 6019 West Eagle Creek Drive. And if we could have separate motions and votes on each item, it would be good.
Three separate motions. Councilmember Sear on item A.
Mr. Mayor, move to approve item 17-217A, please.
Okay, motion to approve. Seconded, Councilman Ruckriegel. Discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. On item B, Councilman Sear.
Mr. Mayor, move to approve item 17-217B.
Motion to approve. Seconded, Councilman Turner. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And Councilmember Sear on item C.
Mr. Mayor, move to approve item 17-217C.
Motion seconded by Councilman Turner. Any discussion on item C? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
17-218 is a communication from the City Manager and Community Development Director with a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff for the following. A is to approve a resolution approving the annexation agreement for 6022 West Eagle Creek Drive. B is to adopt an ordinance annexing the property at 6022 West Eagle Creek Drive. And C is to adopt an ordinance rezoning the property from a Class R3 Peoria County single-family residential to an R2 single-family residential located at 6022 West Eagle Creek Drive. In separate motions and votes, please.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sear, item A.
Mr. Mayor, move to approve item number 17-218A.
Okay. Seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. Is there discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Councilmember Sear on item B.
Mr. Mayor, move to approve item 17-218B.
Okay. Seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing no lights, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Councilman Sear on item C.
Mr. Mayor, move to approve item 17-218C.
Okay. We have a motion to approve item C, seconded by Councilmember Graham. Discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Yes, we have a couple of township items. 17-219 is the Town of the City of Peoria financial report for period ending 6/30/2017 with a request to receive and file.
Thank you. Trustee Graham.
Mr. Chairman, move to approve.
Motion to approve, seconded by Trustee Sear. Is there discussion on this item?
Receive and file.
Okay. Discussion on this item? Motion to receive and file. Seeing none, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Item 17-220 is a communication from the Town Board with a request to approve monthly anticipated expenditures for August 2017 for the Town of the City of Peoria.
Trustee Greb.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve those expenditures.
Seconded, Trustee Sear. Discussion on this item. Seeing none, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
We are at the consent agenda. 17-221 is a communication from the City Manager and Director of Public Works with a request to accept the low bid of corrective asphalt materials and award a construction contract in the amount of $64,443 for the base bid plus 10% contingency for the CRF contract 2017. 17-222 is a request to accept the low bid of micro-surfacing contractors and to award a construction contract in the amount of $324,953, which includes the streets on the revised street list plus 10% contingency for the high-quality aggregate polymer modified slurry seal contract 2017. 17-223 is a request to accept the low bid of R.A. Cullinan & Son, a division of United Contractors Midwest, and award a construction contract in the amount of $258,281, which is the revised street list plus 10% contingency for the seal coating contract 2017. 17-224 is a request to approve change order number 1 for a 1-year extension of the concrete repairs contract 2016 with Horwitz Concrete Company and to authorize the city manager to execute the change order for a total budget amount of $100,000. 17-225 is a request to accept the low bid of Horwitz Concrete Company in the amount of $149,522 with an additional authorization of $30,477 for a total of $180,000 and award the construction contract for the 2017 ADA ramp program. 17-226 is a request to authorize the city manager to execute a grant agreement with the Serve Illinois Commission for AmeriCorps funding for the Peoria Corps program in the amount of $138,285. 17-227 is a request to authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Peoria Housing Authority for the city to provide fleet maintenance services. 17-228 is a communication from the city manager and director of public works with a request for the following. A is to accept the low bid of Illinois civil contractors and award a construction contract in a not to exceed amount of $200,000 from the base bid of $33,262 for the concrete repairs vertical contract 2017 project. And B is to adopt an ordinance amending the City of Peoria 2017 amended annual budget relating to the Eagleview TIF fund balance relating to vertical concrete repairs in the Eagleview TIF in the amount of $60,000. 17-229 is a communication from the City Manager and Director of Public Works with the following request. A is to approve a memorandum of understanding with the National Recreation and Park Association to accept a grant in the amount of $150,000 to plan and build Peoria Green Splash Water Play Park. And B is to adopt an ordinance amending the City of Peoria 2017 amended annual budget capital fund relating to the receipt of a grant from the American Water Charitable Foundation and the National Park and Recreation Association in the amount of $150,000 for the construction of the new public park called Peoria Green Splash. 17-230 is a communication from the City Manager and Director of Public Works with a request for the following. A is to approve the supplemental state motor MFT resolution in the amount of $1,230,000 for preliminary engineering and right-of-way services for the Western Avenue project, Adams Street to Lincoln Avenue, and B is to approve supplement number 1 to the preliminary engineering agreement with Terra Engineering in the not-to-exceed amount of $1,214,621 for the project. 17-231 is a communication from the City Manager and Community Development Director with a request for the following. A is to approve the 2017 Annual Action Plan for submittal to the Department of Housing and Urban Development with a total 2017 grant allocation of $2,194,058. And B is to approve the reallocation of prior year funds to a collaborative rehabilitation program with the City County Health Department. C of that item is to approve the reallocation of CDBG and home program income, and D is to adopt an ordinance amending the City of Peoria 2017 amended annual budget relating to the CDBG fund and capital fund to reallocate CDBG program income to the capital fund in the amount of $4,075. 17-232 is a communication from the City Manager and Director of Community Development with a request to concur with the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance amending an existing special use ordinance 15862 in a Class C2 large-scale commercial district for a shopping center to construct a restaurant with a drive-through for the properties at 6820 North Pear Tree Lane, 6828 North Pear Tree Lane, 4115 West Partridge Way, and 4123 West Partridge Way. 17-233 is a request to concur with the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance rezoning property from a Class C1 General Commercial District to a Class R4 Single Family Residential District for property at 1814 West Forest Hill Avenue. 17-234 is a request to concur with the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance rezoning property from a Class C1 General Commercial District to a Class CN Neighborhood Commercial District for property at 3420 North University Street. 17-235 is a request to approve a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and Community Development Department to adopt an ordinance rezoning property from a Class CN Neighborhood Commercial to a Class I2 Railroad Industrial District for property located at 3100 Northeast Adams Street. 17-236 is a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff for the following. A is to adopt an ordinance approving a preliminary plat with a waiver from UDC subdivision requirements section 21313-B-6 regarding access to street frontage for the property located at 1322 and 1400 Northeast Jefferson Avenue. And B is to adopt an ordinance approving a rezoning property from Class R4 Single Family District to a Class P1 Parking District for 1322 and 1400 Northeast Jefferson Avenue. 17-237 is a request to adopt an ordinance approving the Marudi Gagan Management LLC redevelopment agreement. 17-238 is the reappointment by Mayor Ardis to the Advisory Committee on Police Community Relations with a request to concur of Donald R. Jackson. 17-239 is the appointment by Mayor Ardis to the Historical Preservation Commission with a request to concur of Jan Kraus. And 17-240 is a report from City Treasurer Patrick Nichtine for the month of June 2017 with a request to receive and file, and that completes your consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any items to remove from consent this evening? Councilmember Rodrigo.
Yes, 17-222, 17-223, please.
222 and 223. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Akeson.
17-231, please.
231. Thank you. Councilmember Moore.
That was actually the one I was going to pull
okay.
as well. Thank you.
Councilmember Montalongo.
17-232.
232. Okay. Are there any other items to remove from consent this evening? Seeing none, I have a motion to approve the remaining items by Councilmember Ruckriegel, seconded by, that was Councilmember Riggenbach, seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. If there's no further discussion, please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Yes, we're at 17-222 is the low bid of microsurfacing contractors for the polymer modified slurry seal contract.
Thank you. Councilmember Ruckriegel.
Thank you, Mayor. And just a couple of quick questions on this. 2 years ago, with our budget cycle, the public spoke pretty heavily about the condition of our roads that we were faced as a city, and many of us around this horseshoe took a step in the direction that we needed to make sure that we funded our road preservation and reconstruction to an increased level over what we had been in the past, realizing that we've been having some problems on that. And I guess my question is just for Director Reese, just for clarification to the public. It seems that there may be an increase in actually the materials that has gone up with the change in oil commodity recently. Is that correct? Yes. And therefore, the price of what we originally had budgeted, because of the materials, that price per square foot has gone up as well, correct? Excellent. So the extra dollars that we devoted back 2 years ago in the budget, and then last year when we again approved that the second year of that budget, that whole amount is still going to the reconstruction and preservation of our roads. Is that correct?
Yes. The additional $5.2 million that council approved is all going towards road reconstruction or preservation.
Thank you very much. And I see we're talking about 13 roads that we anticipated to do this year, but we propose that they will be funded next year. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be 13 roads always sort of in lag, because next year if that oil price comes down a little bit, and we can maybe able to pick up some of those that are lagging. Is that correct?
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was my question. And with that, I would move to approve 17-222.
Okay. Motion to approve, seconded Councilmember Sear. Is there any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
17-223 is the request to accept the low bid of R.A. Cullinan and Son for the seal coating contract.
Thank you. Councilman Sear. Or Councilman Ruckriegel, I apologize.
Thank you, Mayor. And my questions were answered in the previous 17-222. So with that, I would make a motion to approve 17-223.
Motion to approve, seconded Councilmember Turner. Is there additional discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Item 17-231 has two parts. The first one is to approve the 2017 annual action plan for HUD, and then B would be approve the reallocation of the prior year funds.
Councilmember Agason.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have just a question about A, and this would be for Director Black. So we are being asked to approve the 2017 action plan for HUD money, and it's the middle of 2017. Is it not possible to pull this plan together 6 months in advance so that we have some time to digest it? And then in addition to that, so I'd like kind of an explanation as to why it's coming forward 6 months into the year. And also, since we have no affordable housing plan, and Councilwoman Jensen has asked for an affordable housing plan to be presented, and I know that City Manager says that we are going to have a policy session on affordable housing. Is it possible for us to delay approval of this until we have more time to go through the 96 pages and see if it meets the objectives the council might discuss when we have a policy session? Or is there some sort of immediate need to pass this tonight?
Thank you, Councilwoman. Let me answer the last question first. The annual plan has to be submitted to HUD by August 16th. If HUD does not receive this document by August 16th, then we jeopardize all of this funding. So that's the last question.
May I ask a clarifying question? Could we have submitted this in February?
No. So going back to some of your earlier questions, and it may help if you have a calendar in front of you to keep up with this. The federal fiscal year begins in October. So the 2017 federal fiscal year started in October of 2016. We did not know what our allocation would be, what the city of Peoria's allocation, as with every other entitlement jurisdiction in the country, until about a month ago. So at that point, we knew how much money we were going to get, and we have a directive from HUD, as do all other entitlement communities, that we can't do the annual plan process until we find out how much funding we're going to receive. So that's why there's a delay in getting it started, but then there's also the deadline to submit it to HUD in August 16th. And let me just clarify, I guess, a little bit further. We still don't have these funds, and based upon prior year's experience, even with the submission of the annual plan in the middle of August, we probably won't see our 2017 federal funds, which were technically approved in October of 2016, until maybe October of 2017. So it's a little messy.
May I ask a follow-up then? So if we were to do this, obviously this will come forward next year as well for 2018. Is it possible to have more notice to kind of digest the information than just a few days?
The annual plan document itself has been available for public comment for the past 30 days. So it's been published and in various locations throughout the city, and then on the city's webpage for the last 30 days for public comment. So the development of the plan is in some ways an ongoing process, but we can't publish it until HUD tells us we're allowed to publish it, which was almost 30 days ago at this point.
Okay. So, and it was, information about this was sent out to the city council members and all the neighborhood groups, and everyone was given fair warning, make your comments known, or was it just published on the website 30 days ago because we're obligated to do so? I don't remember getting a tickler notice about this, but it's very possible I missed it.
It was, I know it was in Issues Update that went out, and I'm sure there was other publications beyond just the legal notice that we are required to provide.
Okay.
And just finally, on the question of the affordable housing policy session, we would be ready within the next 4 weeks to present that policy session at the pleasure of the council.
Well, I move to approve. Do I need two motions for A and B, or is it just move to approve 17-231?
We can just do one. It's the only one where we approved them all as...
D is an ordinance to amend the budget, which we have to certify, just so for ease and
there's four of them.
Motions then?
There's four.
Okay, pardon me. I can only see two up here, and
I know, and there's two more on the top of the next page that I didn't mention, so there are four, sorry.
Okay.
So on item A, Councilmember Igison.
I move to approve item number A.
Motion to approve, seconded by Councilmember Moore. Seeing discussion, Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director, if you could, I did take the opportunity to read through the document, and I was what came to my attention on page 37. There's a paragraph that outlines who is available to receive the CHOTO funds for the purpose of rehabilitating low-income housing. And there's one particular paragraph that I was struck by, and I would like for you to just elaborate a little bit, not just a moment or two. I'll read that particular sentence that came to my attention. The program allows qualified individuals, neighborhood associations, nonprofits, or development firms to submit a proposal for rehab as an alternative to demolition. And in the last few days, last few council meetings, we've been talking about a lot of demolitions that are occurring and how we can save some of these properties. And oftentimes we have associations and nonprofits and firm and development companies coming to us, but it's important for individuals in the community to understand that they too can come and request funding to assist in rehabbing properties that are slated for demolition. Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Sure. Thank you, Councilwoman. There are two items being discussed in this paragraph. The first one is the CHODO funding, which would go to an organization typically to build new houses. The second half, the part of the paragraph that you were referencing, is our rehab program that we have for properties that the city finds itself in ownership of, that if no one fixes them up, then they will be demolished. But they're not so far gone that there's absolutely no hope of renovation. So in these cases, what we have done is we've released an RFP that says this property is available. If someone wants to bid on it, then the agreement is that they will fix it up to code within a certain time frame, and if that occurs, then we will transfer the title to them. So effectively, they get the property for next to nothing, and what the city gets is a house that has been renovated rather than the demolition cost and then the ongoing maintenance of the vacant lot. So I believe that we've released perhaps 6 of these RFPs over the last maybe 8 months or so. We've had 4 responses. One property was recently completed on the East Bluff and turned out very nicely. We've got some in the 2nd District that are in progress right now. What we've done with this just in the last few weeks is we've entered into an agreement with a local realtor to help us market these properties, because our concern was that the RFP that we were releasing and the notice that we were putting out really wasn't reaching everyone that it needed to reach. And so we believe that having that additional listing ability will help us reach a larger audience and hopefully save some additional properties.
So does that mean that the realtor would be putting a sign out in front of that property?
Well, we're going to leave the marketing to them, but most likely there'll be a sign on front of the property. It'll be listed on MLS, the same as any other real estate listing. And obviously the properties are selling for next to nothing. So we have an agreement in terms of what the commission would be on the sale, with the goal obviously being to try and save as many of these properties as possible.
Are we allowing these properties to become rental properties then? If someone buys it, we don't know what they're going to do with it, so it could potentially be a rental property.
It could potentially be a rental property, yes.
Is it permissible for you to let who the realting company is, so that those who are listening can contact that person or individual to determine what houses are available, or is there some website that lists those houses that are available?
The realtor's name is Doug Williams, and right now we don't have any listings. I think actually beyond, we have a commercial building, the old Katie McButt's bar on Knoxville, just south of McClure. I think that's the only current pending property that we have. But as more come up, then we'll make sure that we'll let the council know and make sure the community knows.
With the hundreds of homes that are on the demo list, who goes through to determine which home is savable or potentially savable and which are not?
We have one of our building inspectors who is certified in all of the mechanical and structural parts of the building. We'll go through the property. The realtor, one of the reasons that Mr. Williams was chosen as the realtor was because he also has a contractor background, so he can help in terms of making some sense of, well, this property could be saved, and this is how much it would cost, and then this is what the market is in this particular area. The reality is we have nothing to lose in terms of putting a property out for listing, because the worst thing that could happen is that nobody shows any interest, and then we end up demolishing the property, which is what we would have done in the first place. And particularly at this point in the year, as I indicated in an email to all of you I think a month ago at least, we are out of demolition money for 2017. So at this point, there will be no more demolitions unless it's an emergency situation, which means that we're going to begin to see more of these properties come along that are in the demolition process that potentially could be rehabbed.
So I can tell you that there are a number of individuals on the south side who are interested in going into a property that perhaps is on the demo list, and maybe it's not one of the properties that we've looked at and said we're going to put out for a realtor. Who would that person be? Who would that person reach out to regarding a specific property?
If they want to just call the city's code enforcement line, 494-8654, then we can get them to the right person. And it just, again, so that the listening audience understands that a property could be on the demolition list or a property could be boarded up and vacant and abandoned, but if the city doesn't own it, then it can't be part of this program because we can't put someone else's property out for potential bid. But if the city can get title to the property, then we can potentially make it available.
Does it work in a similar fashion for those properties that are going up for auction?
No. The properties that the trustee is auctioning, they are, I don't know if owned is the correct word, they're held by the trustee, and therefore any purchase agreement or any rehab agreement would have to be between the individual and the trustee.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Grab.
Director Black, how do we compare this year to last year in terms of running out of money for demolitions? It seems like it's earlier than normal. That we're not even, well, not quite, almost to August, and we've got, folks, I'm not talking about historic structures. I'm talking about real problems in some of our neighborhoods, properties that are in very bad shape. They're never going to be brought back. They're blight, and they're detracting from people's home values, and I'm getting calls, certainly in my district, in reference to some of these, and some of them have been challenges for years and years. They've been in the process. So what happened?
Well, quite simply, we had about twice as much money in 2016 for demolitions as we had in 2017. So effectively, we ran out of money probably early June of this year. If we had had the same funding, then we probably would have made it through the end of 2017. We will continue to demolish properties that need to be demolished. In fact, I believe at this point we've had since we ran out of money, we've had at least 4 emergency demolitions, including the one on Atlantic just last Friday evening. And we had a very large emergency demolition of a commercial structure on Southwest Adams probably a month ago. So if a property has to come down, if it's dangerous, we're not going to let it just sit there. But yes, you are correct. There is a backlog of properties that are in the demolition process or that we have demolition orders for that we just don't have the funding to take down at this point.
Director Black, can you explain why we had twice as much money last year as compared to this year? Was this a problem as far as this council, the way we approved the budget? How did this happen? Twice seems, that's a big factor.
I think it was multiple factors, and I would have to give you a precise answer, I'd have to provide a report back, which I would be happy to do. Part of it is that we had some additional federal funds that had been carried forward from 2015 into 2016, which helped bolster the budget. And we had some other funding sources that came in, some other grant funding sources. So I don't know that it's so much that there wasn't the same allocation of local funds as it was just a more timing of when other funding sources came to be used.
Could you give us a report back with the exact numbers? Because I think there is much consternation about running out of money this soon in the year.
Happy to.
And again, I'm certain everybody understands, I'm not talking about a property someone wants who thinks that they can bring it back. I'm talking about properties that we get complaints about all the time because they've been there, they've been in the process for year after year after year, and it's not helping their property values, not helping the neighborhood, their potential arson sites, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to remind me, Director Black, was it last year that we pulled $300,000 out of TIF, South Village TIF, to demolish homes? I know we had $300,000. I believe it was in 2016 that we made that money available.
That is correct. That was one of the additional funding sources. Thank you for reminding me of that. There were funds from the South Village TIF that were used specifically for properties within that TIF area. But I can get a precise accounting and list of all the properties and provide that as a report back.
Any further discussion on item A? We have a motion to approve by Councilmember Akeson, seconded by Councilmember Moore. If there's no further discussion, please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Councilwoman Akeson on item B.
Thank you. I move to approve item B
Okay.
from 17-231.
Seconded by Councilmember Jensen. Thank you. Discussion on item B. Seeing none, please cast your ballots. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Councilwoman Akeson on item C.
I move to approve item C from 17-231.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilmember Turner. Is there discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. That motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
And we have item D.
Oh, I'm sorry. Item D, Councilwoman Akeson.
I move to approve 17-231, item D.
Okay. Thank you. Seconded by Councilmember Jensen. Thank you. Is there any discussion on D? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. And that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
17-232 is a request to adopt an ordinance for a existing special use for a shopping center on North Pear Tree Lane and West Partridge Way.
Thank you. Councilman Montalongo.
Thank you, Mayor. So I had ongoing discussions, negotiations with the developer on over to the weekend. What we've concluded was to create an addendum to condition number 2, and I would like to read this into the record as it reads. Provided, however, that in the event that the permeable pavers are constructed upon the parking lot, then the required installation of such sidewalk along Big Hollow Road may be delayed until sidewalks along Big Hollow Road are constructed upon either or both of A, the property that bounds the site to the north, or B, the property that lies across Partridge Way to the south of the site. So basically what that means is that the sidewalk will be constructed once either the property to the north, which the sidewalk is developed then, or the property to the south of it is done. So with that, I'd like to move for approval.
Okay. Motion to approve with the notations as Councilmember Montalongo mentioned, seconded by Councilmember Turner. Councilmember Montalongo, any additional comments on this item?
No.
Okay. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing no lights, please cast your ballots. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
We're at regular business. 17-241 is a communication from the City Manager and Community Development Director with a request to concur with the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission for one of the following. A is to adopt an ordinance approving an amendment to Special Use Ordinance 16932 in a Class B1 downtown commercial district for the Peoria Civic Center facilities to add activities at the corner of Fulton Street and Jefferson Avenue and other grounds improvements for property at 201 Southwest Jefferson, 702 and 720 Fulton Street, 109, 125, 129, and 132 Southwest Monroe Street, or a recommendation from staff to adopt Ordinance B. And I believe it's very similar. I won't read the whole thing.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Moore.
I'd like to defer to Councilman Ruckriegel. This is an item that is in reference to the Civic Center. Is that correct?
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ruckriegel.
Thank you. What we have before us is a special use variance that has gone through the Planning and Zoning Commission, and all of the variances are identical between the Planning and Zoning and the staff recommendations, with the exception of one. And that recommendation is for screening that would go around temporary bleacher storage that happens over in a parking lot. One of the things that I think we can all agree upon is the vitality of the Civic Center is one of those things that we definitely like to see. The better use that we get out of the Civic Center, the more that we are able to create down there, it spurs economic development. It really puts the dollars invested by the public to good use. And what you're seeing here is really a move through what is being requested here to make sure that we not only look at what is happening inside the building, which is what Civic Centers used to do. It's kind of the old model. You look and you kind of work within the bricks and mortar, to what is happening on the full property. And so you'll see that what we're looking at is areas that we can really generate revenue. And I think both positions here actually would agree on that. The one that is the little slightly different here is the screening of the bleachers. When the bleachers are being removed for an extended period of time, they're being moved off-site for storage. But on those temporary times when 24 hours, 48 hours, maybe 3 days, where we've got so much activity going on inside the Civic Center that we need to move some bleachers around, they are and have been for a number of years placed over in our parking lot. It's ease of access. We can pull them in, pull them out. We can make adjustments very quickly as we're going from one venue to the other venue to the Civic Center. And we feel this is appropriate and would like to be able to have this fluidity to be able to really operate the property as we can. It gives us the best ability to really sort of manage what's happening inside. It also allows us not to build a structure that would take up parking that, again, is one of those things that is vital to the way that the Civic Center operates. By creating a structure that would take up what really is a sizable amount of parking when we would need it, would make that unacceptable or inaccessible and could create some problems there. So while I can appreciate staff's recommendation, what I would move for would be a motion to approve item A, which came through our planning and zoning. It was vetted extremely well there, and I think that the variances were discussed pretty heavily, and they were agreed upon with the Civic Center. So with that, I would make a motion to approve item A.
Thank you. The motion was seconded by Councilmember Moore. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I visited with the Peoria Civic Center Authority as well regarding these bleachers, and quite frankly, if you're not looking for them because of they're not on a main thoroughfare where you can see them, you wouldn't even know they're there. And I agree that with all the activity that's going on in the Civic Center, taking away parking is the last thing we really want to do. And so when they brought this to my attention, I thought, I had to really remember where they were talking about. That's how out of the way they are and really unnoticed. And so with that, I thoroughly accept and approve and would like for the City Council to also agree that it is not necessary to build a permanent structure for temporary use for bleachers that are pulled in and out so frequently and would not, and that permanent structure would then also take away parking, which we can't afford to have done at the Civic Center at this point. With that, I second this motion.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this item? Councilmember Jensen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess given what's been said by Councilwoman Moore and Councilman Ruckriegel, I'd like to hear what the staff's reaction is to that. And if it's your position is still that the screening should be there.
Well, certainly that's the recommendation that's coming from staff, and so it is what it is. Having said that, it's I don't think it's a make or break item in terms of this overall amendment to the Civic Center's special use. The concern that the staff had in terms of the storage of the bleachers was as we have with any type of large outdoor storage, is the frequency, the duration, and the location. And the Civic Center may be able to mitigate the complaints that my department has received from the public about the visual clutter of having the bleachers if they were perhaps stored elsewhere or closer to the back of the buildings on Main Street, just somewhere that wasn't literally at the corner of Perry as cars come around. So I think there are probably other ways to mitigate the issue of the storage of the bleachers rather than having some type of permanent screening if that certainly is the desire of the council.
Can I ask a follow-up? What would those types of things be to mitigate the concern and the look of it?
Well, location being one of them, simply just not in the middle or close to the driving lanes, the further from the public right-of-way that any type of large equipment, whether it's bleachers or semi-trucks or shipping containers, if the further they're pushed away from the public way, the less visible they become. The other, landscaping is always a good way to do at least some type of screening. If the bleachers are in the Monroe lot, as cars come around there are certainly trees on that frontage, maybe some ornamental grasses or some native planting in that area that would provide some type of screening. It wouldn't make the bleachers invisible, but it would soften the visual impact, if you will. And it would also provide a screening for any vehicles that were parked in there. So I think there are multiple solutions that are out there.
So I guess in response to that, I wonder if the maker of the motion and the seconder would agree to include some kind of mitigating action, such as the landscaping or other things that Director Black has suggested here tonight.
Councilman Ruckriegel or Councilman Moore?
I guess let me speak to that. Again, we've got a property, a campus really, that hopefully the taxpayers have invested in to be able to get the maximum revenue out of. And one of the things that I think that making a motion on the floor here probably takes away is we had a recommendation go through planning and zoning which really studied this issue, much probably better than us trying to sort of fabricate something on the floor. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Black, is when we met 2 weeks ago, I think that we were told by staff that there were 0 complaints that had come in, but I think in our discussion through an email, you said that maybe since this item has hit the agenda, we've had 3, but they've all been anonymous. Is that correct?
I can, Councilman, I've personally received probably 3, maybe 4 complaints. They're not all necessarily anonymous, but I would like to keep them that way.
And I think that the Civic Center Authority, we can definitely work and talk about maybe where we can locate those depending on the areas that we've got going on in the Civic Center. I think that it might be improbable or impractical to put those in the middle of our parking lot when we would need real use of the parking lot, and then you've got people that are having to maneuver around an object that is in the center of the parking lot versus it being tucked away in a corner. And I would lead it to the Civic Center Authority has heard the concerns and will make a very good effort to work with making these as invisible as possible. I know that they try to get those out and get those back in right away. And in many times, these bleachers are actually used for other entities besides the Civic Center. They are borrowed by, I believe it is the school district and some other places. And so sometimes that delay is actually because we are working with other bodies as well. So I would leave my motion as made in the understanding that the Civic Center Authority has, I think, heard what we've talked about here, and they will do their ultimate best to be able to mitigate this issue. But I think that versus us, rather crafting something on the floor, the planning and zoning, who've had the time to be able to study this, and their recommendation is what I would prefer to go with.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Akeson.
So, how many options were considered for this? Were there just 2 options, leave them where they are without any screening, or provide screening, which the Civic Center Authority doesn't want to do? Are those the only 2 options? Could they be stored someplace else in a vacant building someplace? Or, I mean, they've been an eyesore for a very long time. I know that when we were having some trouble on Main Street with a couple of the establishments down there, I know that I would drive around and I'd think to myself, what the heck are these things always here for? I mean, it's an eyesore in our downtown, and they're very noticeable. And I remember when the Civic Center Authority was selling the expansion project to the public, and there were grand vision drawings and things on easels, and it went to all the commissions that there'd be this dramatic change at the corner of Fulton and Jefferson, and then all the other activity that was an eyesore would be screened, and there were photographs of ivy climbing on walls, and the public believed that they were going to get a facility that largely was going to be a dramatic improvement. And we've been, unfortunately, Fulton and Jefferson didn't get the attention that it should have. And now it's, going to be used, in half season with an ice rink, and then there's an eyesore of a, sand lot there. I mean, it's, I'm not so sure that this was given as much vetting as you are describing. Maybe so, but I think it's an eyesore, and I would be much more in favor of the screening, and I think for a downtown facility it should be of that caliber and that expense. That was a huge amount of money that the taxpayers invested, as you've made a point to remind people. And it's been somewhat disappointing from a fiscal standpoint anyway.
I have Councilmember Moore and then Councilmember Rockriegel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure the Civic Center would have no difficulty. I'm assuming they may not have a concern with maybe moving them away from the street view. I know the parking lot that I'm thinking of, it backs up to more manufacturing or retail, the back of a retail building, if you will. And so maybe that's a better option to kind of move it in that area. It still frees up parking spaces without having to build a permanent structure or incur additional costs. If it's put back there, you won't be able to see it anyway. And it, within these trying times of economic funding that people are having, I would hate to insist that the Civic Center incur costs that are really not necessary when they can just move it away from the street view to the back of the parking lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Rutherford?
Yes, and I can appreciate Councilman Akeson's comments on the corner out here, and I think that very shortly, after this is hopefully approved, we will see some changes there because a lot of these variances will go to the enhancements of the corner that I think we can all agree that the sand lot is probably not the most ideal to look at for all the months that the ice rink is not there, and I think that what we'll see there is a much more pleasant view that welcomes people both to our City Hall and our Civic Center. And that's what really brought about what we see in front of us today. And I think that those capital investments that the Civic Center Authority plans to make will be much appreciated by our citizens.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Graham?
Well, we certainly have a beautiful Civic Center, and it's a great economic engine for our community. And where would we be without it? And the $65 million expansion was splendidly done. I recall those years when it was being done. We had meetings all over the city explaining the expansion and why it was needed. And I do believe optics are critical, and I think optics translate into dollars. So when you have the area next to the City Hall not looking good because we want to have an activity for part of the year, that's a problem. Before we allowed ice rink to occur there, we needed to have a plan to make it look nice when the ice rink went away. I don't think it's a small matter, the optical aspect of the Civic Center. I think it's critical that the Civic Center be a trendsetter as it relates to optics and what looks good and what doesn't. I agree with the staff on this. I just think that, we missed the mark with the ice rink and what we were going to do after the skaters went away. I think the skating was fine, and I think we're missing the mark here. And yes, optics do count. When people come to our Civic Center, they want to see a beautiful area. And you're right, Councilmember Akeson, there were all kinds of promises made about Main and Jefferson and how it would look great and so on and so forth. We had long debates about whether we would change some of the glass that had structural issues that make up a very important part of the wing of the Civic Center. And so I'm not going to support this particular ordinance recommendation. I have to support the staff recommendation. And I would hope that whether I'm on with the prevailing vote on this or not, I would hope we would have a plan to, and Councilor Ruckriegel alludes to a plan, to make the corner next to our City Hall, for crying out loud, look better than it does now when we don't have the ice rink out there. To me, this is so elementary, so fundamental. I don't even know why we're talking about this. I really don't. So, yeah, I'm going to support the staff on this. I'm going to vote no on the ordinance that's being recommended. And, yeah, the Planning Development Commission does a great job. But I just think we're missing the mark aesthetically once again.
Thank you. Councilman Ruckriegel.
Just for clarification, because I think that there may be something that's not translating through the information here. The corner out here is going to be done, no matter which of these is put through. There is a fence, landscaping. The sand pit is actually going to be covered, and for any time that is not having an ice rink, it is going to be a beautifully landscaped corner that will be able to actually hold venues if we would so choose. And the nice thing about that is, where in the past, for the months we've had this wonderful ice skating rink, which has brought people downtown, but has always had this sort of orange construction fence, we are actually now going to be having a ornamental fence that will go around, which will not only protect skaters, but will help to enhance the property. So those things are going to be done. Those things are in this plan. The only thing that is different between these two plans is the temporary structure for the bleachers. Just for clarification.
Councilman Grave.
My point was to not have this aesthetic blight, we should have had the plan in place after the ice rink went bye-bye. We should have had something then. There should be more foresight. I'm heartened to hear that we're now going to alleviate something that's been an eyesore, but it should have been in place in the first place. So, I have to look at this proposal here tonight with jaundiced eye because we missed the mark in the past. And I've heard the same complaints that you're referring to, Director Black, and I don't mind indicating who some of the complainants were, but I won't. Not tonight anyway. They will be sure to weigh in if we don't do a better job with our facility and with screening of things. So, some thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Akeson.
Thank you. I do have a question about, when I was reading through this, there was a change to temporary signage. And is this, if we approve A, does that temporary signage get approved as well? Okay. Oh.
Yes, the only difference between the two ordinances is the screening of the temporary storage.
Temporary, right, okay. So I do have a question about this idea of temporary signage. So are we talking canvas beer banner signs? Is that what we can expect to see? Because I'm not in favor of that either. We don't need to see any more beer banner signs around, especially not down here near the city hall. Everyone knows that if an event is going to take place at the corner of Fulton and Jefferson and there's alcohol being served, it can be, it'll be obvious. But is that something that would be one of the possible signs that would go up?
Well, Councilwoman, let me try and answer it this way. The request really is to allow for an administrative review when a temporary sign is either larger or is going to be up for longer than the ordinance allows. So that's what the request is. In terms of the content of the sign, we have, as you know, we have very little, if any, jurisdiction over what someone puts on a sign, because then we're getting into First Amendment issues.
So in other words, we could say no signs, right? And just, no signs strung along the wrought iron fencing would be fine by me. And I think that should be articulated in this, no signs at all. I think that should be changed. And I still agree with the staff. I think that the screening is really important. And I'm sure that there are some council members that weren't at the presentations when the Civic Center was urging the public to agree to dedicating the HRA tax to the expansion. And believe me, they really sold us on what the corner of Fulton and Jefferson would look like. And it was a dramatic improvement. And it would be, the idea was that it was going to be programmed with concerts and small venue events and all sorts of things going on. And in this proposal, I didn't see a list of what is being conceptualized for this fenced-in corner area. I think that would have been a good idea. In addition, there were no other renderings other than an overshot view. I think street view renderings from all sides would have been beneficial, and I think it would have been easy for the designers to do that for us. So I think that, again, we're making decisions with, not enough information and all sorts of, how did that happen, outcomes. And which is why the Civic Center corner looks like it does today and why the screening is needed.
Councilman Ruckriegel. We probably have hashed over this quite a bit, so we should try to draw it to a point of a vote.
And on the sign, the intent would be for signs that would be temporary signs that would show what is happening in the Civic Center. Some of the venues and the Civic Center Authority has talked to us in that meeting about that with Councilman Moore and myself. is some of the venues require a certain amount of signage to be able to get here. It is not necessarily for beer, for what we're purveying in there. What it is for the venue itself, such as if Wicked comes in. And again, those things are to really accentuate the offerings that are held there on a temporary basis. But with that, I would make a motion to approve as stated for number 8.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. I haven't spoken yet, but I would like to just acknowledge the fact that Ann Clayton, who is the general manager of the Civic Center, is with us this evening. I'm positive that she's heard every bit of this discussion and understands some of the council's concerns. And at the same time, the council is, I think that I can say, very appreciative of what you worked with PNC to do with the ice skating rink and the improvements made over a couple of years, and where it's going in the future, and the concern that's being addressed to take care of that in the future. Regardless of where the motion comes down, I'm sure that the general manager will take these concerns back to her board, and very often I know that the chairman, Mr. Manning, listens in or checks in on the minutes from the council meeting, so they'll be aware of it as well. Councilman Montalongo, is this your light?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief observation. This area is such an important piece, and I really think the council should be unanimous on this decision here. And maybe we're trying to pull the trigger too quickly here on this, and we should have some more discussion about it. At this point, I'm going to vote no, but I wish we could defer this and have more discussion until we can have a unanimous decision on it.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. I'm seeing no more lights. Please cast your ballots. The motion passes with 7 ayes, 4 nays. Voting no, council members Akeson, Graham, Jensen, and Montalongo. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Item 17-242 is a communication from the City Manager and Director of Public Works with a presentation of the Downtown Streetscape Master Plan.
Mr. Manager, did you want to set this up, or do we go to Director Reese?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a presentation of a downtown streetscapes plan that was prepared by OJB. They were the landscape design firm and planning firm that was working on the Caterpillar headquarters project. And this was part of that project. One of the deliverables that Caterpillar provided was some conceptual renderings about looking at how, in light of all of the need to redo the streets for the CSO, that we might want to look at redoing the streets in downtown. And I'll let Director Reese take the presentation from here. It's been, I think, vetted through the Downtown Advisory Commission and through the Transportation Commission as well. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Yes, both the Downtown Advisory Commission and the Transportation Commission had a chance to work through this and look at it, and we had input during the process on it, as well as a number of public meetings and charrettes to come up with this plan. I've just pulled some pages out of the larger document to really focus on the renderings. Some of the print is rather small, but it's just focusing on the pictures themselves and the renderings to go through this. So OJB came up with a complete green streets plan for the city of Peoria, and basically it was looking at our downtown area and the walkability and how we can get water to infiltrate in different areas of town. It started off by really looking at kind of the T, which would be the riverfront and warehouse district area on Adams, Jefferson, and Washington, and then up Main Street in Hamilton, and how that tied in throughout the city, and just looking at the existing traffic patterns and the streets that we have out there and how many lanes are on each one and each street. And they came in the winter of 2015 and took pictures of downtown Peoria. And really, these pictures are meant just to show how wide our infrastructure is and how car-centric it is in the downtown area. And this just shows how we looked at each district, the Central Business District, the Warehouse District, the near North Side, Medical District, Randolph, Roanoke, and really even how it ties in to Bradley University. And so making that T into the riverfront and trying to see what we can do to revitalize that core and in our downtown. So got a lot of public input just on what Peoria is known for and what people want it to be known for looking into the next 50 years. And just came up with, preserving its historic character, the riverfront, and then the culture. So these were just screen captures of the charrettes that we went through and worked through with everybody of all the input we got on it. And then we started working through what the streets could look like, which included a lot of changing alignments of streets in the downtown area. Really one of the focuses was trying to restore the grid system. We've had a lot of conversations with council on converting one-way streets back to two-ways. And this actually took it a step further versus just Adams and Jefferson. This looks at converting Glendale and Fayette and Perry back into two-way streets in the downtown area and trying to really reconnect that grid system. So this is just an example of what Glendale would look like. The most challenging part of Glendale and Fayette is where Fayette comes off the interstate and meets up with Glendale, but we were able to work through what we thought was a reasonable design that would accommodate converting Glendale into a two-way street. The benefit of council adopting a plan for like this or giving input to staff so we can eventually get something adopted is it lets us have that discussion with IDOT. Usually as we're going through any changes that we want to have on a downtown street that's under IDOT control, which Glendale is, they want to know what our long-range plan is. And they don't want us just to piecemeal it together. They wanted to see an overall view of our vision for downtown. One example of that is the parking on Glendale that we put by 3030 Coffee, right at the corner of Main. That was a 3-year endeavor to get through the Department of Transportation in order to get those 10 parking spaces on. And so adoption of a plan like this gives us a document that we can point to say this is where we're moving forward to, just to continue that ball rolling forward. So this just continues as another rendering of Glendale and Main Street and shows actually adding some boulevard on Main Street. And really the focus is trying to green it up as much as we can in the downtown, and then also adding as much on-street parking as we can in the downtown. And then this one is just a rendering of Hamilton and Glendale. And you'll see, there were some liberties taken for private property areas. Like just to the north of Glendale is Methodist Medical Center. And we actually show taking a large portion of a surface parking lot right now that's there and making it green space. But what we did is we worked through the study, we looked at parking needs, and really with the on-street parking that we were able to add, it offset a lot of that surface parking lot area. And you'll actually, ironically, one of the slides later gets into the corner of, into the Civic Center parking lot. And it shows actually connecting Monroe or Fulton all the way up through there and just realigning all that. You'll see that in a little bit. So, and it's actually right here, is realigning Perry Avenue at Kumpf. And this is what I was talking about as far as basically resetting the grid system in Peoria. There used to be a movement to get away from the grid and really to move traffic out of downtown as fast as they could for the last 50 years. And so this focus was more on not necessarily making it as easy for the cars to leave downtown, to try to keep people in the downtown area and keep it active and vibrant. So this shows realigning Perry through what would be the up to Kumpf Avenue. And basically what it does is it slows down all that traffic. Right now it's more like a major highway type approach. With that, it allows you to turn off Perry quite easily, and it just reconnects it to a 90-degree intersection in each direction so that it slows everybody down and just tries to equalize the equation between the pedestrians and the cars. And it also, we're looking at converting Perry and Fayette to two-way streets in the downtown. This was, like I said, an overall plan, just trying to see what it would take to convert all of our one-ways into two-ways, because a lot of studies have shown that that's another way to increase economic viability in downtowns, is if you have the space, and we don't necessarily have the car demand in downtown that there might have once been, that you can get by with converting one-ways to two-ways and better utilize your right-of-way. As I said, council is back in, I believe it was 2012, council directed us to convert Adams and Jefferson to two-way streets as transitions came online. And so we incorporated that into the plan as we were working through it and just trying to phase it in. And any renderings that we had or any cross sections that we came up with, we wanted to be able to make them transition into a two-way as easy as possible. And the whole thought is, as we build out, we're able to take chunks and blocks at a time and convert those into two-way sections. So another big point of the project was actually converting Fulton Street, or opening Fulton Plaza back up to a throughway so that it goes from Jefferson all the way down to Adams, but making it a very narrow street with a lot of parking, and just really try to reconnect that grid system. So as we work through it, I will say we learned a lot through the warehouse district improvements that we've done. We've determined some changes that we could make. I would say one of the biggest changes is looking at planners and looking at amenity zones, and then also trying to increase as much parking as we can. We don't always on-street parking, yes, I should say that. Increase the number of on-street parking spots as we can. I would say that's one of the things in the warehouse district that we have learned is we never have enough on-street parking down there. And any place we could add it, as we went through this, we looked at adding that into the plan. And it's very similar to the warehouse district concept. It's just some minor tweaks, and as we learn more, we're trying to adapt our plans to that. But it's allowing as much space for amenity zones, so you can have a sidewalk cafe there, but then also meet your ADA compliance outside that sidewalk cafe for the pedestrians to walk through, and then also having some green area for water infiltration. So we have cross sections for each street in the 276-page book that goes through this, that kind of gives us some guidance for each one. And it also talks about how we can transition through like intermediate stages to transition into the two-way. But one thing we wanted to also focus on as we get into CSO is our green infrastructure. And so we always looked at ways to infiltrate that water back into the ground versus putting it into the sewer system, which then is overwhelmed and releases into the river. And these just show, each are renderings that show what it would look at like in downtown as we would go through it, and shows each zone separately. And then this is really part of the plan that we were showing, and it's part of the process we've been working through for about the last 4 years as far as this green infrastructure, and how when you say green infrastructure, people don't necessarily always understand what it is or what it could be. And so this book actually, or this plan, puts together how the green infrastructure works, how we infiltrate it through planters and then back into the groundwater, and how a system or a tree trench would work as we install it. We also looked at the bike master plan as we did this, and tried to show anywhere that would have bike lanes in there, and then also bike-friendly streets. And then we also looked at a walkability diagram, and just seeing each of these are 5-minute radiuses. So if you pick a point in downtown, it shows where you can walk in 5 minutes time. And a lot of that, and we're working on educating the public a little better about where the city has public parking spaces available, trying to get a map put together that we can put out on our website A lot of folks, as we talk to them, don't realize that the Twin Towers deck is a city deck and that there's public parking in that, and that public can park in it. And so we're trying to figure out ways to increase utilization of our decks, and so that every place doesn't have to have their own surface parking lot, and so that the public is more willing to walk places. So this just showed some of the, it also went through and it showed some of the possible parks. This is the Civic Center parking lot. Like I said, this was just taking some liberties. It's by no means an absolute. It's just seeing of potential. But this really, it allowed for the same amount of parking, because we added a whole bunch of on-street parking in this area, and just took the center of the donut and added green space that could be used or programmed. And then this was another rendering that was done to show what the Civic Center parking lot could look like in programmed green space. And then this is the Methodist Medical Center, some just looking at utilization of parking lots and potential for green space. Because everywhere that we take pavement out and put green space in, that allows more water to infiltrate into the ground, which helps us with the CSO. Really, it's just a wet weather issue. It's when it rains, we have a problem. And so it's just trying to find ways to infiltrate that rain back into the ground. And this is an aerial rendering of what that park could potentially look like at Methodist. And this even took into the library's parking lot and taking a look at potential there. And with that, that's pretty much the presentation. I don't know if there's any questions or comments. I think our intention was to just present it tonight and then bring it back at the next council meeting for adoption, if it's able to.
Okay. Questions, comments, discussion? Are we not getting a... Okay, let me figure out why. Okay, there we go. Councilwoman Akeson.
Director Reese, thank you very much for bringing this forward. And I really appreciate the fact that, this does give everyone, reason to think about parking lots differently. And one question I do have, this was largely a result of Caterpillar's interest in upgrading our streetscapes with knowing, or at the time, knowing that they were going to reconfigure their world headquarters in our downtown area. Now that they're not, how does that impact this study as far as some of the assumptions that were made about the buildings and how they'd be used and how those blocks would be used? Are we going to readjust it now that we know that that's not going to take place?
I think really we tried to keep it just to the right-of-way, looking at this and the streets and the building use with the designs we were looking at for the right-of-way really can fit regardless. I think the biggest impact of, knowing now about the world headquarters is it just kind of slows down implementation. It's just more of we're going to use some of that revenue generated to redo a lot of these streets.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Greb.
Thank you, Mayor Artis. A few observations. We'll start with the mundane. First picture provided says Main and North Street. I don't believe that's Main and North. I think that's probably Main and Flora. It's that picture one.
Get to it.
It's that picture one.
It's what?
Picture one.
Picture one. Oh, okay. Agree.
That's Flora.
Then if we're planning to do something at Main and North, we probably shouldn't be at Main and Flora with the picture. Correct?
Yes.
Yep. And the other issue is the bioretention ponds, rain gardens. Can we use these words synonymously?
Yes.
I don't think the public has any problem with native grasses, et cetera. They get it. I understand about the CSO. Many of our citizens do understand it, but they are not pleased when there are weeds intermixed with these. And we have not done a very good job with the plan to maintain these, and we've had many complaints about some of the rain garden areas, not only in my district, but even downtown from the public. This is unacceptable. We need a plan. The trains need to run on time. Do we have a plan to make certain we don't set a poor example by violating our own codes? What plan do we have to ensure this doesn't recur?
I believe as we would implement, we have to have a coinciding operating budget or special service area or something to address the maintenance need, because it does require a higher level of maintenance than sidewalk or pavement would. And I believe our thought as we get into a consent decree or something with the CSO, part of that implementation plan is also funding a proper maintenance plan.
My point is that we should have been able to contemplate the need for maintenance of these bioretention areas. I don't think that requires that we have some PhD in eco-science to figure out. And I think it reflects very poorly on the city when we do a lot of things right, that we had these huge aesthetic issues when we're trying to make things look better and also do a better job with that stormwater runoff. Not a fan of back-in parking. Maybe some of the rest of you have heard wonderful things about the back-in angled parking. I have not. What positive input I've had is many times outnumbered by those who say that it is a problem. I understand the reasoning. It would be easier if mom's trying to get in the car with the kid to have the car pointed out. But this is a real challenge, and unless I start hearing more positive comments, I think we're going in the wrong direction with that. And now from the more mundane things to the weightier matter, Mr. Manager, out to our employees today. You have given a letter to all of our employees that we are potentially facing a $7.9 million shortfall in our budget, which is a huge challenge for the policymaking body. If those numbers hold up, I hope they don't. But here we are talking about doing these wonderful things. I would suspect, and by the way, I have no problem with it, I would suspect this costs money to implement this. And my concern is we already have certain things in the griddle right now that need to be done. And before we start committing ourselves to all kinds of additional programming here that costs money, we need to figure out how to continue to pay for things that are already in the hopper. So this is really not a very good night to have this presentation unless this is free. Unless you're going to tell me this is just a lot of paint. Director? What's the price tag on this?
The price tag, I think, originally was around a $70 million price tag. But really, it's not about, we don't have any of this in the implementation hopper at this point in time. It's really just to allow us to have that discussion with IDOT on other roads to show that we do have a plan, and anything we would do spot changes are not.
Did I hear you say 70 million?
I would anticipate somewhere in that range.
Well, okay, and I understand the need to get a better cooperation with IDOT. The mayor, police chief, and I were at a neighborhood meeting, and we were discussing the need to be able to develop some properties along the corridors that they control. And, you know, I'm a fan of that. But, and conceptually, I think, you know, this is fantastic. I just make, you know, a few things that I can live with, but giving you some feedback. But I support complete streets, as you know. Probably the template is at Maine University, which we used. And we used it also to help make the case that we could do a green solution for our CSO issue. And I absolutely am positive about the bioretention ponds and everything else. So by and large, Public Works gets an A. But just some thoughts before we get all giddy about doing this. This is good, but it's going to cost some money. I really don't know why it would cost $70 million, but it just doesn't seem like it should cost that much. But I'm not negative about it. I'm positive. But it's kind of like we're talking about this tonight when our employees are getting this memo from the city manager. We're looking at a 7.9 potential deficit, which I hope to God is not accurate, because I guarantee you, you will not see me voting for a budget without a human face. You will not see me doing what we did a number of years ago, and we cut 36 police officers, dismantled code enforcement, and didn't fix our streets, and lost a lot of value for our properties, especially south of Ward Drive, which in many cases are yet to recover fully. You will not see me going along, you know, into the dark night with that kind of a situation where we're going to be cutting the ribbons, cutting the heart out of this city when we've been trying to rebuild it with a Marshall Plan. We won't call it Marshall because Leonard Marshall left a number of years ago. We can call it the Uric Plan, if you wish, if that makes everybody feel better, the Reese Plan. But we can put out the memo, $7.9 million, but staff, administration better come back with something other than draconian cuts, which did huge damage a number of years ago when the people sat in these chairs and they thought they were doing the public a favor during the Depression era, damn close to a depression. Because we're just digging our way out of that mess right now, rebuilding our police force, rebuilding our infrastructure, trying to take care of challenged properties with code enforcement, our employees working their hearts out. So I'm waiting for the recommendations to come back. I've already made it clear on previous occasions, don't just come back with cuts. Because we'd be losing a lot of ground. Now, I don't know how we keep people, for example, in the city when we again do what we did, repeat the mistake of a number of years ago. Now, these are preliminary figures, Manager, correct? And they may not be this bad. Might be worse, huh?
Maybe we can, and I understand the connection between talking about this plan and budget, but maybe we could have the budget discussion under new business, keep focused on the...
Well, I am staying focused. Here we have a presentation that's going to cost $70 million if we fully implement this. $70 million. I'm worried about the letter going out to our employees, about $7.9 million. I'm worried about what that does to morale. I have to be worried about that, Mayor.
Councilman, and I don't disagree with you. The Pioneer Park...
I'll bring it up under new business then.
Okay.
That's fine.
Thank you.
We'll do it under new business.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, did you want to respond to the question regarding the street?
Just specifically to this presentation, this has to be taken in the context of recommendations here in downtown would be implemented as part of the CSO process. So as we start to implement, which that price tag is well over $200 million that we're talking about, is that many of the implementation elements that are built into this tie directly into managing the stormwater that comes into the downtown area that has to be managed and mitigated as part of our compliance with the Clean Water Act. So we're going to be required to do some of this, maybe not all of it, but some of this as part of the CSO process. That's all.
Thank you. Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, I don't know where to go after Councilman Grab's comments. You know, I acknowledge his concerns about the maintenance issues with the green infrastructure, as well as the cost. But I have been an advocate of complete streets since I've been on this council. And I'm glad, you know, I've been an advocate of it and our use of it in a number of other projects, including Maine and University. So I'm glad to see this coming forth. And I appreciate all the staff's work. I attended, you know, the public workshop, and I know you had a lot of community input, and I think that's important. So I'm very supportive, although I know the cost is a concern, as well as the upkeep. But I'm glad to see this finally moving forward, and I look forward to seeing it implemented in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Regenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Director Reese, and your team in getting this put together for us. Just one observation that I would like to make is that this is a concept at this point, and as I think you reiterated several times in this is not, this is the first step in order to begin dialogue with IDOT and Department of Transportation. So I don't want people to get the impression we're spending $70 million and we're authorizing moving forward with the $70 million project at this point. I think people need to realize, we need to realize that this is the direction that we want to go based on the complete streets that we've been talking about for a number of years, but that these pictures, and I can't reiterate enough that a lot of these renderings encompass private property, that they're very conceptual, and that this is not the final product that we're proposing for downtown Peoria, because that just would be very unfortunate if that's the message that comes out of tonight's discussion. So I just wanted to help reframe that. So, so just for the record, the next steps, you need a formal adoption of this at some point so that you can relay to the Department of Transportation that this is our operating procedure. Is that correct?
Yes, our plan was to bring it back at the next council meeting with some tweaks as we receive feedback and for formal adoption, and then at that point we use it as a planning document moving forward. So if something comes online and we budget for one of the streets within these corridors that are defined in this downtown plan, that we use that as our planning document and our guidelines for what council envisioned that street to look like.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Akison.
Thank you. I'm just going to quickly just reiterate what Councilman Riggenbach said. So this is mostly for guidance, conceptual ideas that are fundamentally the complete street elements for public right-of-way, and any impact on private property was just to give an idea of what could happen, but that would be the responsibility, and that would be totally within the private property owner's purview as to what happens on their property. But it's important for us to all come together and agree that the main concepts in this document we need to adopt as a council so that we don't make the same mistakes that were made decades ago. And I think that we know that IDOT doesn't turn on a dime, and the decisions we make today will impact what happens 20 years from now. And I think the conclusion is narrower streets, more trees, wider sidewalks, blending and balancing the different modes of transportation. The City Council of Peoria needs to all get behind the concepts. And because of the CSO, we're going to spend a tremendous amount more than $70 million. It's being, it's a mandate. We're being told you will spend money to address the CSO. So if we're going to spend the money, let's do it to give the public the most bang for the buck. So I hope that when this comes back, everyone can get behind it as a concept document and a planning document for the future. So I appreciate it very much.
Councilwoman Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director, would it be possible for you to perhaps highlight those areas on the concept when you bring it back that are directly related to CSO? And then also, as it relates to Illinois Department of Transportation, I agree, getting in front of them, getting the plan in front of them so that a few years from now they're ready to move when we're ready to move. That's also a wonderful thing. I would caution us about going any further than that to spend funds that need to be spent in the neighborhoods. The things that are legal to be done, CSO, yeah, I'm all over that. IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation, for sure. But beyond that, any funds outside of those things, I would want to redirect to the neighborhoods, specifically the North Valley and the South Side. I know South Side, and to some degree, the North Valley will be the recipient of improvements as a result of CSO. But outside of those funds, though, for the downtown, we need to focus back in the neighborhoods, not so much in beautifying a downtown. I think our downtown could stand a little beautification, but not at the expense of the neighborhoods that have waited far too long. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Graham.
Councilor Moore, you're my ventriloquist. If we have a $250 million fix, let's just, using the figure that was thrown out, we don't know what it's going to be, and we're going to do $70 million conceptually, I'm hearing now, instead of real stuff. This is all conceptual Star Wars stuff. 70 from $250 million leaves only about $180 million for the rest of the city. Are you kidding me? It's exactly what Councilmember Moore just said. She's got the Northern Valley, she's got the South Side, I've got the heart of the city, and so on and so forth, with all the rest of the districts. This is not well thought out the way this is being presented. This is fantasy. This is fantasy. This is nonsense. And you all know it is. And I will never support a plan that puts $70 million into our downtown, leaving maybe only $180 for the rest of this city. This city is bigger than Paris, France. It's almost 50 square miles. So presentations like this mean something. If it's all Star Wars stuff, don't bring it here. You're wasting my time. I think these are wonderful visions, but it has to be economically feasible. I obviously have bought in with the complete streets philosophy in large measure, although I do not believe that what we have done in some parts of the city should be replicated elsewhere. I certainly didn't feel that some of the things that we've done in parts of my district should be done everywhere in my district. Nor did my constituents. There was some talk about doing a boulevard down North University Street, making it almost impossible for people to get onto University Street from the side streets. This is fine when it's used judiciously and where it belongs. One size doesn't fit all. So, some cautionary notes from me to you. I've been around way too long. This is not the way you do this. If we have a beef with IDOT, and we do, and we should have a beef with them, then this isn't the way to get their attention. This is going through the back door. And I do have a beef with them for reasons we've discussed and reasons I've discussed with people in my neighborhoods. This is going through the back door. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Turner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You know, I find this meeting really interesting because a lot of times we sit down and we ask the staff to bring us something and we raise hell because it wasn't enough. It wasn't what we wanted. I don't care if it's medicine, if it's a building, if it's finance, if it's anything else. It all starts with a concept that people start to talk about as to how we can bring this into realization. But that's where it starts at. And we act like this is the final copy. We've gone on here now for over an hour saying the same thing from person to person to person. This is a concept, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll have plenty of chances to talk about it. There's no reality here. And once this concept is finalized, it'll have something that we all can work with. But why complain? Every time staff brings us something, we argue and complain about it or say it's just not enough. Well, they brought us a completed document, and it's up for us to look at it, figure out what we want, and go from there. But it's a concept. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Not seeing any more lights, we'd probably entertain a motion to receive and file. Councilwoman Akeson, seconded by Councilman Regenbach. If there's no further discussion, please cast your ballots.
I'm not going to vote for a concept.
Okay.
I want a plan. Where in this council communication does it say concept? I'm sorry, this is just gamesmanship. This is a communication from the city manager and the director of public works with the presentation of the downtown streetscape master plan. It doesn't say a conceptual master plan to be done over God knows how long a period of time. There is no way that I'm going to acquiesce in spending $70 million out of $250 just in the downtown. This has meaning. And those of you who don't have a district need to realize that we have to answer to the people in the districts. So, you know, it doesn't say concept. It doesn't say that. Now, I guess we're being told it's a concept. Thank you.
Okay. The motion on the floor is to receive and file the presentation. Please cast your ballots. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
We're at unfinished business 17-172 is a request to approve $302,738 in HUD home funds to Habitat for Humanity Greater Peoria area for the construction of 3 new affordable single-family owner-occupied homes located in the 900 and 1,000 blocks of Northeast Monroe.
Thank you. Councilwoman Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you recall, this item came before us, I believe, maybe a month ago, and it was deferred because there was a challenge that had been received, and we had to answer that challenge before we could vote to move it forward or to make a vote on it. Back at that time, I'd indicated that this is a project, Habitat for Humanity, as one of the very prolific builders of homes, single-family homes in the North Valley over the last couple of years. And in looking at the renderings, you may remember, for those of you who have been around for this, the entirety of their building there, this council has given them feedback as to what we wanted to see there, what we wanted the houses to look like. We wanted it to mesh with the community. And in looking at some of these designs, it appears that they've taken a lot of what was recommended and have included those things in the plan. If you were one of the folks who have gone out and helped participate in the building of some of these houses or the ribbon cutting for the families who were taking over the houses, you understand that this is a process whereby the people who receive the blessing of one of these homes has to contribute a certain number of hours into helping build other people's homes, so that not only do they get to understand what it takes to build a house, but they understand what it takes to maintain the property as well. Having said that, I would like to move for approval.
Okay. Motion to approve, seconded by Councilmember Regenbach. Further discussion, Councilmember Akeson.
Thank you. I have just a couple of questions about the attached garage in this particular neighborhood where the majority of the garages are not attached. And is there some way that somebody can address that? How is it that if we're going to be sensitive to the context of the neighborhood, how is it that we have attached garages on these properties?
I can certainly try to answer the question. Attached garages certainly add utility to the property that a detached garage does not. I certainly agree with you that that the majority of the properties in this particular part of town, if they have a garage, it's probably a detached garage just based upon when the properties were built. However, in terms of any negative impact on the neighborhood by having these particular houses having attached garages, based upon the review that we undertook, that the Historic Preservation looked at, that the State Historic Preservation Officer looked at, and now that the National Council on Historic Preservation has looked at, that they've found no negative impact.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this item? We have a motion and a second. Seeing none, please cast your ballots. The motion passes with 10 ayes, 1 nay, voting no. Councilmember Akeson. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
If there's no further unfinished business.
Do we have any unfinished business? Unfinished? Councilman Grab?
No, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
Not unfinished.
Okay. Unfinished? Seeing none. Madam Clerk.
We're at new business.
New business. Councilman Grab.
Thank you, Mayor Artis. This past Sunday, the Journal-Star, Chris Kiergaard, reporter for the Journal, did a very extensive report on the proliferation of payday loan businesses in the city of Peoria, what was occurring a number of years ago, especially with the proliferation. And the city council took action back in 2008 to make it more difficult to have such a proliferation in terms of separation requirements. Last time we met, I specifically wanted to ensure in my mind, in anticipation of the story, because a lot of these payday loan places are not only in our city but in my district on University between War and Forest Hill. I specifically asked our corporation counsel if it was possible for the city with its home rule powers to cap the interest rates that they're using to gouge our public when they go in need of some extra money. And our Esquire Leist, our corporation counsel, said that we did not have the ability with the home rule powers. I wanted this absolute clear in my mind before the council meeting started, that we did not, as a home rule municipality, have that power. Yet, in the Journal-Star story, and I'm hearing about this, and I hope you're hearing about it, they quote an executive director of a Bloomington-based advocacy group as saying that towns like Peoria do have the ability to cap rates, though he admitted the group hasn't yet had success getting a community to impose them. They came the closest several years ago in Bloomington, quote unquote, he said. Now, what's that all about? Again, this, to me, there's a problem here. It either is or it isn't possible for us to do it. Because I guarantee you, we can get a majority to cap some of these rates. If you bring forth an ordinance, I'll bet you I can get a working majority to do it. They're absolutely taking unfair advantage of our citizens. Now, can we once and for all get this put to bed, Mr. Manager, Esquire Leist, tonight with our public, what's been in the Journal-Star, what is correct and what isn't correct? I don't care who addresses it.
Well, I will answer that question, Councilmember Graham. I am unaware of who rendered the contrary opinion to my own. I will say that reasonable minds can always differ, especially when you're discussing an issue of law. I can just tell you that it is my opinion that the state has regulated this field through the licensing procedure of the state in terms of the licensing authorities and under the Professional Licensing Act and Regulation Act, and through various acts, including but not limited to the Consumer Installment Protection Act, the Payday Loan Act, which specifically covers the amounts of interest that a entity such as a payday loan can charge, and the statute speaks to the maximum amount of interest that can be charged and says anything underneath that ceiling is legal. With that being stated, it seems to me that the state has instituted a comprehensive scheme and would thereby take away the power of the city to increase or in any way alter the rates set by the state.
Of course, if we're looking for good leadership in Springfield, we're looking in the wrong direction.
I will say that there is some federal legislation that it's making its way through the House and onto the Senate. However, the state has already acted in Illinois.
Well, I think then the news item does mention some of the difficulties down in Springfield getting tighter regulations and rules. That part of the story, it's very clear that Springfield, they seem reluctant to form a constitutional majority to slap these rates down even farther. But could you do some more research and bring something back, a report back that's quite definitive, that will cause my mind to rest, that there's nothing this body can do to put a cap on these? Could you do that? And can you call this gentleman to see where he's coming from with these comments? Because he's saying we can do it.
Well, as I said, everyone can have a different opinion. I can just render mine as corporation counsel to the city. But I would be, of course, be glad to respond to your question, and I would be glad to talk to the attorney for this organization, and perhaps he could persuade me otherwise. Although I can tell you, I don't think it's likely, because I think there would have been a community in the state of Illinois that would have done so if it were possible. But I will be glad to bring that back.
All right. And And also, he goes on to say another route that the city council could take, because we want to complain about these places all the time. All right, let's do something about it if we can. He said Peoria could pursue, and I'm quoting from the Journal-Star report of Sunday, a further tightening in its zoning restrictions. He said that in Decatur, IPA was able to push for an ordinance that capped the number of facilities and limited them to only certain commercial districts and forbade other loan companies from taking over a shuttered site, though ideally, quote, we wasted a more restrictive limit, or we wanted a more restrictive limit that would equate them like a sex shop business and put them in an industrial area, end of quote. So, what I'm saying for this body is that if we have a way of tightening up even more where they're going, let's do it. We didn't have any problem getting some restrictions done in 2008. I want this looked at from every conceivable angle. I'm here to represent the people, and so are the rest of us. And if there's some way we can put even more of a kink in the operation of these piranhas that prey on our people, we need to do it.
I would be glad to look into that, of course, within the bounds of the law and the constitutional rights.
Never ask you to operate outside the bounds of the law or the Constitution. And tonight I voted for the recommendation of staff over here when a majority of you did not. So let's make it clear. I support staff, and I support you, Esquire Leist. I know you're going to dig into this, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Akeson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in response to the predatory lending that Councilman Gray was discussing, when I did my binder on Knoxville blight, predatory lending was one of the tabs in that document that I prepared. And my recommendation to staff at the time was that we look into limiting the number of these facilities that perpetuate, because it's not just the payday lending loan stores, it's other operations too. Rental furniture is a predatory lending, and I think that if you all find your binder in your revolving file, you'll see that one of the most egregious is people get sucked into renting furniture and then discover they pay 10 times more than the original piece of furniture costs. But it's a double-edged sword, because any sort of restriction then might prevent somebody from getting some furniture or something. So, all of these decisions have this double-edged component, but I am completely in support of restricting this predatory lending, because it's only going to get worse. So, and then may I just bring up one other new item that I'd like to see? I would like to have a presentation or a policy session on the nuisance property and the data that we use to evaluate whether properties become designated as nuisance, and the integration, the potential, some options for us to be able to integrate code enforcement and the police department as far as data entry is concerned. And the reason I'm bringing this up is a property in the city of Peoria came to my attention, and when I dug in a little further, I discovered that there were 83 calls for service for this one particular property, and I asked the staff to give me information 2 years ago from July 5th. And when I got the information from staff, I then took it and I put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and I discovered that as time went on, and this is just from 2 years ago, as time went on with this one particular property, the calls for service started to escalate and get worse and worse and worse as far as what you would consider to be concerning. And it was clear to me after about 30 entries in my data sheet that the property should have been considered a nuisance, but it didn't necessarily comply, or the conditions weren't exactly ordinance, what's the word, compliant would that be it, city manager?
there's certain criminal offenses or environmental offenses that would trigger what would be designated as a nuisance property.
So this Excel spreadsheet that I put together didn't include the environmental code infractions. There were no code infractions in this information. It was just calls for service to the police department. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that when you look at it in an Excel spreadsheet, it's obvious and clear that we were in trouble just 10 calls in. And then as you start reading through it, you start to see, oh my goodness, things are really getting out of hand at this property. And it wasn't until 18 months later that it was deemed a nuisance. So I'm not sure if we're restricting our staff from being able to identify properties properly. They're working on it. I think we owe it to them to listen to them and get a sense of how, what kind of tools they have to address these problems, because right now we have 196 properties within the city that have been deemed a nuisance, but I was advised last week that the number is going to escalate to numbers that we are not going to like to see. So not only do we need to identify the properties, but we need to be able to give the staff permission to devise a plan so that we can address this, because it seems to me that there are properties in our city that have gotten so out of control. We are now at a point where I don't really see any other sort of solution other than criminal prosecution for some of these people. And so I think that the City Council needs to have a policy session on nuisance properties and then some sort of suggestions for how we can get simplified data that's integrated from the Code Enforcement Department and the Police Department, so that at one quick glance, everyone has an idea of how problematic these properties are. And I got a list today when it was presented by street, and there are some streets in our city where 2, 3, 4 city blocks, every property is a nuisance. And that should concern all of us. So anyway, I look forward to having that, and I'd like to see it as soon as possible. I don't know if we should put a time limit, like within 6 weeks, something like that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Lice, did you have your lights on?
And I think that's something that we can do from a legal perspective. But I know what you mean by calls to service. But certainly, I just want to state that there in no way are we seeking to in any way inhibit or in any way make our citizens feel that they can't call police or therefore still be considered a nuisance property if they're a victim of a crime. And I know you didn't mean that, but I just want to make that clear for the record.
No, and actually, I'm really glad that you brought that up. My focus has been on property maintenance primarily. Property maintenance. This has nothing to do with the tenants who are living in properties that are rented. My observation is if we can address property maintenance and get it when it's first starting to decline, we will be confronted with less crime later. I think that if properties are well maintained, that is key to the survival of these neighborhoods. But once it gets to the point where the properties have declined so much, then what you see is you start seeing less kind of less care in all aspects. And we need to address it as a city council. We've got a serious problem, and I think we all need to know what it is so that we know what we're dealing with. We have to be able to measure it. And without this information, we're not going to be able to do it well, and the staff certainly is not going to be able to do it well. So if they could bring back kind of a comprehensive report, I'd appreciate it.
Council Member Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The item that I have that I want to bring to the staff's attention, I know that Manager Urick, you and the staff have been working on developing the plan for the park. that will be after the demolition of Riverfront Village. So I just want to make sure after, I've been a long time attendee of the Riverfront Market since it opened 14 years ago. And now I just want to make sure that their concerns, I know that staff has met with them and they've been part of the stakeholder meetings, but that whatever plan comes forward, because I think it's coming to us fairly soon, is what I'm hearing. I don't know if that's true, that it does consider their concerns and it does include, a place for the Riverfront Market with paved area for them and adequate on-street parking, because that's a real asset to the city. I guess 3 weeks ago, they did a count and they had 4,400 people in attendance just during those few hours on Saturday morning. So it brings a lot of people to our downtown that then stick around and do other things. And personally, I hope that plan that comes forward includes adequate space for the Riverfront Market. And so that's what I am asking for. Thank you.
Councilmember Ruckriegel.
Thank you, Mayor. This morning, there was an important event that happened with Heart of Illinois United Way, which happens every 3 years. And it's one that I think that as a community we would wish we would never have to happen, but it was the presentation to member agencies, board members, and invited guests of the community assessment. This community assessment happens every 3 years, and it gives a in-depth look at some of the challenges we face as a city, as a county, and as a six-county region area that is covered by the Heart of Illinois United Way. Information that is really a pathway for not only member agencies, but for many of our not-for-profits, community organizations, or neighbors who are just getting involved in one way or the other. Executive Director Michael Steffen has sent me with copies of this to be able to pass out to all my fellow council members, and I hope you take time to study this 29-page document. And if we go online, there is actually about 80 pages of supporting documentation that I think is a lot of reading, a lot of data, but it's well worth the time invested in it. Because we shouldn't have to be reminded that in our area, 1 out of every 5 children under the age of 18 lives in poverty. But sometimes I think it is a good reminder for us to remember what is important about what we do here and what we do around the city council has an effect. And while some of this data shows the broad region, some of it shows the city, it is important to know where we fall in the context of this. There's also some new categories. Disproportionate housing, which, by the way, in that 6-county region, we're 24.6%, which means that low income of disproportionate housing, they may be more than one family member to a room, or they may have incomplete plumbing or kitchen facilities, or they're spending more than 30% of their household income on rent. And what we'll find in here are really information on 3 key areas: health, education, and financial stability. All 3 which I think that oftentimes the agenda items that we talk about deal with. And with the latest conversations that we've had over the past several years around this council, I think it's important that we take the time to really reflect on this important document as a city council, as a community, and so that we've got a common language and a common skill set. So with that, I appreciate the work that went into preparing this. I thank the Heart of Illinois United Way for their work, and I will pass this out to the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Graham.
I appreciate the comments of one of my colleagues tonight. That's Councilmember Akeson about one of the items that she touched on was our chronic aggravated nuisance properties. Manager, where are we with the software that will automatically allow the police department to find these so that it's not council generated quite often?
Staff at the police department have been executing or finalizing the contract with ADSI to implement that. We should be ready to go before the end of the year to build that patch between our CAD system and the ADSI system. So it's going to cost a little bit of resources that they have, but it's in the budget, so they'll be able to build that in. So.
Well, that's kind of what I heard last year, that we would have it done by this year. Why are we running behind on that? Because, you know, the point is, many of our neighborhoods are just fantastic. But when you get some of these malignancies in them, people lose hope. And they wonder why they should have to put up with a nuisance property. Or the owner of the property not qualifying tenants, putting anybody in there. They don't want to invest any money in it. Right. So they don't care who goes in it. And consequently, the neighborhood suffers, and then we wonder why we wonder why our population's declining. You had, in your letter to employees, you mentioned the decline in population. So, can you elaborate on why it's taking so long? This is one of the biggest problems we have, and certainly in my district.
Well, I think first and foremost, the ADSI company is not a very big company, and in the discussions that our IS department and our police department was having with ADSI, we were driven somewhat by their schedule of when they could get to it. And so, because it is a proprietary system that we're running our criminal software on, our police department software on, that it was taking a little bit longer than what we had anticipated in order to get that done. But a
year longer.
I know, and the police department has. It has been on their radar screen. It is something that they want to get done. So it will be done this year.
What will this allow us to do that we're not able to do now?
Well, what it will connect those calls for service that Councilwoman Akeson was talking about directly into the reporting software that the city uses for generating reports, police reports, and documentation. Right now, we have two different systems because you have the computer-aided dispatch system, which sends police officers to a call, and then when they write up their report, they're writing it up in a different system, in a different record-keeping system. So,
Manager, would you let us know? Now, I've got you down saying it's going to be done this year. I want to have a big party. People in District 2 will show up in droves, especially when they live in neighborhoods where these nuisance properties have been. We've been going after them as best we can, but frankly, the police department, they need a little bit of help. It can't always be coming from the constituents, the squeaky wheel, people who are complaining. We should have a way of doing this in a very objective, legalistic, in accord with the laws and the Constitution way. And so I'm waiting for you to tell us mission accomplished. Thank you, Manager.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm seeing no further lights under new business. If there's no further new business, Madam Clerk.
We're at citizens' opportunity to address the City Council.
Citizens to address, we just ask name and address for the record. We have a 5-minute limit. And up first is Jeremy McCulley.
Jeremy McCulley, you said the address? 105 Concord East, Peoria. I've been a Peoria paramedic assigned to advanced medical transport for the previous 2 years. I'm here tonight because I'm deeply concerned with how public safety is being performed and the terrible direction it is headed. I've been following the conversations held in this room, hoping I would get more resources to better serve your citizens. Shockingly, instead of an honest debate, I've witnessed a charade. I quit my job, a job that I love, to be here tonight and speak the truth. I only have a few minutes, so I'm only going to talk about some of the more pressing issues. Speaking to the microphone. Hard to hear. Could you hear me? First of all, AMT is always late to the emergency. This is because you've contracted out public safety to a company whose primary mission is not public safety. AMT takes risks by sending the ambulances out of town to perform lucrative intra-facility transfers. This causes the remaining ambulances, if there even are any, to respond to Peoria's emergencies at great distances. I often ask myself, how many Peorian citizens died under my care because I didn't get to their homes soon enough? Many people come to mind. AMT has allegedly mitigated these risks, not by providing the city with more ambulances, but by creating quick response vehicles. These quick response vehicles, or QRVs as we say, are basically cars that respond to the emergencies and perform care until the ambulance arrives. The problem with this is sometimes the only way to save a patient is at the hospital. And these QRVs can't transport patients. Let me ask you, what happens to the man having a heart attack that needs the cath lab? Or the woman having a stroke that needs a CT scanner? Or the child seriously injured whose only chance of survival is in the hands of a surgeon? I'll tell you what happens and is happening. They die or become permanently disabled. The Firefighters Union, for well over a year now, has been requesting permission to save these patients prior to the ambulance's arrival, but is being obstructed by the Peoria Area EMS office. Apparently, Dr. Jackson doesn't think it's important for Peoria to even have advanced life support services. I could suggest he tell that to the several Peoria citizens I've personally saved with my paramedic knowledge and skills, but that's not necessary. I'm certain he's aware of the recently passed House Bill 1952 that allows fire trucks with a paramedic on board to become advanced life support. You have to ask yourselves why the state recognizes the importance of paramedics, but Peoria does not. It's clear the Peoria Area EMS office, either by coercion or corruption, is in alliance with AMT. To partly resolve this issue, it is imperative for the Peoria Fire Department to be switched to the Proctor EMS system. The Proctor EMS system has an expanded scope that will better serve your constituents, and more importantly, they still have their integrity. In regards to advanced medical transport, it's my understanding that Peoria can opt out of the contract in 5 years. I believe it's time to begin planning for this transition. The fire department already has enough paramedics. All you have to do is give them the ambulances. This isn't really going to affect the current AMT employees because the only thing advanced about advanced medical transport is the turnover. I know that some of you campaigned on public safety but have been silenced. I can tell you, following this speech, it's going to get harder as AMT fills pockets and initiates an aggressive advertisement campaign. Rest assured, you are no longer alone. The movement to end AMT's 25-year occupation is highly motivated, exponentially growing, and decentralized. To put it,
Mr. McCauley, your time expired. Thank you. Go ahead and let her rip.
We will defeat their propaganda with the truth, and we will restore sovereignty to the people of Peoria. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Sierra.
Mr. Sierra, 1708 South Stanley, on the south side. I want to continue what I started at the last meeting. I was really up in arms because this 4th of July was really terrible. In fact, it was un-American the way a lot of people conducted themselves. And I was saying that the people on the city council got to adopt some ordinances that got teeth to control the conduct of all our citizens, to address all the ordinances that should be made. Don't allow a big poster to get put up to urge people to buy illegal fireworks, and start the information of these ordinances and let people know that they will be paying a big fine. And get these words out. You've got to preach it from the pulpit and preach it in the schools to the students that are growing up, that they've got to learn to be lawful citizens and obey the laws that the ordinances are put up for. And, I'm glad that the police department said we're going to have 20 more people this coming year on the 4th. And even that isn't going to control all of it. We have to do a lot better because, people know that they're not getting their money's worth, and I know it's not the police fault. It's all these unruly citizens that they get by with, you might say, murder, and we got to get a little more civilization when we celebrate our 4th of July, especially, and we got to get together. I've told you that we have to make stricter ordinances. That's one of the things that, you people are sitting up there taking 2 and 3 hours, asking questions and preaching too. A lot of times you don't get any place. But when it comes to the safety of all the citizens, we're going to have to do better, a lot better. I've been on this earth for a long time, and this is about the worst 4th of July that I ever experienced. So I urge you people to get with it, and thank you.
Madam Clerk?
We do not have an executive session, so we would be at adjournment.
We have a motion to adjourn by Councilman Sear, seconded by Councilmember Euler. Please just cast your ballots. That motion passes unanimously. We'd like to thank H. Wayne Wilson and his listening audience at WCBU, as well as Cable Channel 22. This meeting is adjourned.